we need to talk about Severance, everything we know so far and the details that people may have missed on Severance Season 1. Now, this video particularly will be focused on the lore, what is going on in the show, what MDR is really doing, what Lumon is all about, what are the goals of Lumon, and all of the clues, the details, and the canon details of the show that can help you start to understand more of what's going on in the show. Understanding the characters, understanding what you're really watching, so that as season 2 comes out, you're reminded of all the things to look for as the episodes go. Now, future videos on my channel will not only be breaking down all of the future episodes in season 2, but as well as breaking down some bigger theories and some more ideas that will branch off from a lot of things that I mentioned in this video. So if you are interested in a detailed analysis of the entire show of Severance to help you understand what's really going on, hit that subscribe button, like this video, comment down below, and let's get right into it. The first detail to catch about Severance and understanding the show is in the name itself. Severance is a term that usually refers to severance pay or a severance package, where an employee receives compensation and a wage after being laid off or after their job has been eliminated or replaced and they parted ways with the company. Now, although this seems to be only the benefit of the employee, it actually tends to benefit the employer for several reasons, including the fact that they can avoid negative press after a layoff. They can also stipulate in the contract, usually after accepting severance pay, that an employee cannot bring legal action against the company. And it's also a way for them to keep costs down overall when they downsize or they restructure. Now, although this doesn't sound exactly like what we're seeing happen in the show, it's a double entendre and a play on words. Although severance itself is a very corporate term for a very corporate leaning and themed show, it is also a double entendre on the fact that we're watching these people in the show who are severing their brain in half in order to work in these jobs and maintain a work-life balance where they forget what they did at work. Now, also within the show, you know that a lot of the people who end up on the severed floor are underqualified workers for a biotech company who are taking jobs that are paying them more than they would likely receive, but most likely is underpay for someone who works at a tech company. On top of the fact that they are building out the severed floor to expand. Now, this is exactly what happens in real life with severance, where people are getting laid off because their jobs no longer matter. Maybe they're getting replaced by AI or something more efficient than a human being, and therefore they're being laid off and given a severance package. And just like in real life, for the severance package, although it seems like it benefits the employee, it actually benefits the employer to avoid certain processes. So does severance and the severance procedure in this show. You can't sue a company if you don't remember what you did at work. You can't do all of these different things, and these people are underpaid workers who are replacing other people's jobs, and the severance package is restructuring the entire company and by proxy going on to restructure the entire world. It is similar, it is a double entendre, it is a connection, and I believe it is all connected. The imagery of this show is super, super important. The use of wide angles and wide landscape shots, liminal spaces within Lumon itself, and the influence that I can't help but catch of what seems to be similar to Backrooms. Now, if you are familiar with the concept of Backrooms, which is something that was huge for a while on YouTube itself, Lumon looks exactly like this. The severed floor looks like a backroom. I believe that there is some influence of this mythology of Backrooms and what's really going on in the Backrooms at play in this show. There is clear color theory throughout the entire show. The obvious use of reds and blues to denote the choices and the foreshadowing of the actions and the states of beings in each of these characters. Similar to what I think a lot of people picked up on, which is the Matrix and the blue pill versus the red pill. Blue is representing Lumon, and it's representing following the rules, being a part of the system, and just letting the system control you. everything around Lumon is blue. It's all types of different shades of blue. If you catch even the blues in some of the beginning scenes of this show, it might even look black to you, some of these blues, but as a connoisseur of black, these are not black shades. These are the darkest shades of blue, which I think is representative in the fact that some of the most evil leaning characters wear the darkest shades of blue. There's also green included in this as well, which I believe is to match the original prototype of the Severance chip. We later on learned that the prototype of the Severance chip was specifically green and blue. And I believe that the shape of the chip actually looking like a pill is not a coincidence. And this is the green and blue pill. It's not just the blue pill, it's the green and blue pill. As we see later on in the show, you also start to see red pop out at the most random times, but it's truly not random. And I'll get into more of that in the rest of this video. But every time you see red, it's a foreshadow of somebody who is about to go against the system. Throughout the entire show, it's corporate email office talk the entire time, which I think really drives home this otherworldly feeling and this inhuman feel of what it's like to work in a corporate office setting, selling your soul to be here in a weird quote unquote way. When I was showing the show Severance to one of my friends, they didn't understand what was going on. And they even said to me, are these people AIs? Which then I couldn't help but see as you continue to watch the show from that perspective, that they move, they walk, and they talk like they're not real people. I believe that's commentary on the fact that in order to survive in the corporate world of America currently in this day and age, there is an air of forgetting who you are and just showing up to work and pretending to be this person who you're not. And this person and this thing is not real. This corporate email talk that you have to do to fit in and to keep your job, to be professional and be considered professional, to dress professionally. It's all commentary on all of these things. Now, at the root of what makes this show particularly so good is because with the concept that they've ran with what it means to be severed and what severed people act like, this childlike humor that they have throughout the show over such a deeper plot and a deeper lesson underneath it all makes the show as good as it is. What is Lumon? We know that Lumon is a company that started in 1865 or 1866. Now, according to the Kira Egan Memorial, it says 1865. However, in dialogue, canon, and in other places, we have seen it say 1866. Now, I don't believe that this inconsistency is an accident. I believe that we've seen in a couple different ways there is an inconsistency when it comes to years, and I believe this is a hint at something going on in the show. Now, with Kira Egan being the founder of Lumon, we know that he was the original founder and CEO of Lumon, and he created the original company. Now, the company started off as a topical salve company and expanded into biotechnologies, pharmaceuticals, and tech, and eventually became what we now know as a global mega corporation. Now, it's had 8 CEOs since the beginning of Lumon, all in the Egan lineage. A couple different CEOs that I'm not going to sit and list right now. That'll probably be a separate video. And there's a couple ones I want to point out probably in a separate video. But we know that the current CEO, James Egan, invented the Severance prototype. Current CEO is the one who invented, or at least found and invested in, the current Severance prototype and created the Severance procedure. Now, Lumon is in Kir, PE. PE is not a real place or a real state, neither is Kir, and it is near a city called Gans, PE, where it's also not real, and Gans is where Mark S., our main character, is from. Now, I want to talk about what PE might actually be, because at the beginning of the show, the very first episode, there are a lot of answers if you look closely. And what I believe is one of the most missed answers, aka the detail I believe everyone missed, is Delaware. Now, with the questions that they ask Helly R, it's easy to miss the importance of the questions being asked. The overall most obvious reason they're asking Helly R these questions is because they want to know what she remembers. But I believe her answering Delaware was actually a huge hint. Now, why would she remember out of all states Delaware? Well, there's a lot of information about the state of Delaware that is relevant to this show. Delaware, beyond being the first official state of the United States, is the corporation capital of America. It is known as the corporate capital of the world. It's also called the chemical capital because it is the administrative and research center of several chemical companies. Now, beyond the obvious implications of why corporations do business in Delaware, which is because they do not impose an income tax on corporations registered in the state, there's even more to this because the Delaware court is the oldest business court in America, using judges instead of juries, which speeds up the legal proceedings and maintains the most advanced and up-to-date case law, which corporate lawyers in Delaware rely on and refer to. With experienced judges who specialize in corporate law cases, Delaware companies can expect faster and more informed decisions on legal matters surrounding their business. With more predictable results, corporations, owners, and shareholders will have decreased liability and litigation. Delaware's corporate privacy laws offer great flexibility and confidentiality for businesses as well. On top of the fact, you can look up and research a long history in Delaware of chemicals and companies that are putting chemicals in the grounds and basically ruining Delaware because all the companies, including chemical and biotech companies, all are in Delaware. So I believe the hidden detail of her mentioning Delaware out of all the states starts to tell you more of a story. And I believe that Delaware is what Cure PE and GANS PE are based off of, where Lumon is. Let's talk about the logos. Now, there's two logos throughout the entire show that represent Lumon. One being the water drop, the most obvious one, and the sphere that they see on majority of the computers. Now, a water drop logo typically signifies purity, which we've seen brought up later on what the refiners are doing, which again is all going to start to tie together as we get through the rest of this video. Now, a sphere logo like the one we see on the computers in Lumon makes you think about global things like environmental protection, space research, and social problems. Reflecting their desire to take over the world is what I think that the logos mean. Purification of whatever they're doing, the data that they're refining, which we'll talk about later on in this video, and a sphere logo that represents the earthly global access and the global reach that they plan to have. Now, according to the Lumon handbook, we know that they came from humble beginnings as a small topical salve company to the world's leading pioneer in biotechnologies. Well, what is biotechnologies? It is the exploitation of biological processes for industrial and other purposes. So to make it a little simpler to understand, it is technology that uses biological systems, living organisms, or parts of it to develop or create different products. They study human genetics, viruses, plants, fungi, bacteria, all types of other things, basically using living things to study how different drugs, different techs, and how to basically utilize and manipulate some of these things. All things that play a role in what? The severance procedure. So as far as we all know, all the other floors of the Lumon building are normal until you go to the severed floor. Now let's talk about severance. What is severance? Severance is a surgical procedure pitched by the company as an effortless way to separate personal and work lives. It is a small chip that, again, I want to remind you, looks like a pill that they insert from the back of your neck into your brain. This chip activates the work self called an innie at work and turns off when you leave. Now, this innie has a memory of who you are in your personal life, and you, the outie, don't remember anything from work. Lumon tells you in training that your innie will be like a kid with little to no life experiences. The point of severance is to create a new meaning to the work-life balance, something we're familiar with in the real world. Your innie was you, but not you, a whole other personality. But the question is, if you with no memory of your life, would it really not be you? Now, let's talk about who the severed are so we can start to explore that concept of the you are. Are you you if you're not you? Now let's start with Mark S., our main character. Mark S. is an emotional, depressed wreck in real life, barely functioning out of grief. As we know throughout the rest of the show, he lost his wife a couple years ago to a car accident, and he's been dealing with the grief of that since and not handling it very well. He does drink, he's lonely, he's depressed, he lives alone, and in order to get away from having to deal with all of this grief and a way to avoid it, he became severed. Now, throughout the beginning of the show to the end of the season, although you'll be led to believe that Mark's innie is not like him, it is actually not the case. They share some innate qualities that start to show more near the end of the show. They both have this innate quirkiness and sarcasm and a dry humor and this ability to try to fit in and pretend to care that's not actually the case. And this carries over in both his outie and his innie. And as we'll see more obviously displayed through different innie and outie relationships, although some of these personalities seem to be opposites, at their core, they're actually the same. He's been at Lumon for about 2 years. And as he tells us himself, he himself as an innie had an adverse reaction as well, similar to Helly's. He asked to leave 19 times. Now, he was severed to forget the pain of his wife passing away for 8 hours a day to avoid it. Now, as we come across this character, we come across the first day where he becomes the new department chief because Petey, his work best friend, is no longer at Lumon and he has no idea why. He has zero heads up, and he is now the new department chief. Petey was the old previous department chief. As we continue to watch Mark's story throughout the rest of the show and the episodes, he's struggling to maintain the control of the workspace and starting to question what's really going on at Lumon, both inside and outside, both his innie and his outie, which is reflective of this subconscious link between emotions and intuitive feelings that these severed people still maintain. Emotions carry over. Innies and outies can feel the most recent emotions after a switch. For example, like Mark's innie still feeling the effects of having cried in the car, not quite knowing what is going on. They refer to it as breathing wrong, right? Something that they also say Petey was doing the day before he disappeared. That is important to note. This implicit connection emotionally that still happens between an innie and an outie is explored way more in the Lexington letter. Now, if you have not read the Lexington letter, I'll tell you right now that you should go read it. It's under Apple Books, Severance, the Lexington letter, and it explores a couple different topics that the writers wanted to be able to explain on their own terms, and therefore they created this supplemental content and supplemental lore for us to explore between the seasons. Now, in this letter, it explicitly talks about how one character named Petey K and her innie and outie could experience emotions after they had transitioned, after they had switched back. She could feel the emotions of a hard day, or she could feel the emotions of a successful day. And this is something we see happen also in Severance Season 1 between multiple innies and outies. I will reference the Lexington letter, but I will not be doing all of the breakdown of the Lexington letter in this video. That will be an entire separate video, so subscribe if you want to see that video. Let's talk about Petey, the previous department chief. We get hints early on that something was off with Petey the entire time. Like I said before, Dylan mentions how he was breathing weird the day before he left. Why? Why was Petey crying or upset before he entered Lumon the day before he was terminated? Now, he becomes unsevered or reintegrated, as we know later on, and this makes him sick. He later dies from the complications of this sickness, but not before reaching outie Mark and giving him a map of the severed floor, which causes all of the events we start to watch later on in this show. Let's talk about Dylan G. Dylan G is one of the most interesting characters in the show to me, in my opinion, because he's just outright hilarious. But he is the perfect example of what they mean by your innie being childlike, having enough of these vague memories of what the world might actually be like, but not quite truly understanding it. Having this childlike understanding of the world around them, how they act, how they move, and just listening to what is being told to be done, right? He is one of the best refiners, always the refiner of the quarter, multiple times, has the most incentives and the most things that he's earned through doing his job. But this all hits ahead when he finds out he has a kid. He's very clearly a family man. He is someone who likes to adhere to what is called being a part of a clan. And the clan was always this MDR versus everyone else, right? Versus O&D, for example. But once he found out he had a kid, it was no longer about MDR and it was all about his family. And that is going to be a huge part of his arc as well. We know a lot of things through Dylan G, like what the actual refiner process might actually look like, how long it generally takes. And we learn a lot of this lore through Dylan G. Now let's talk about Irv B. Hello kids, what's for dinner? Again, another clear example of understanding the world vaguely but not truly, as getting sayings wrong like hello kids, what's for dinner. Now, we know that Irv B has actually been at Lumon for 9 years. This was something that people figured out from the fake LinkedIn profiles that they gave each and every one of these characters. Now, he's been at Lumon for 9 years, but was only severed for 3. The question is, why? What was he doing for those first 6 years, and what led him to choose to be severed for 3 now, and why is he doing it? Well, I think we get the hints from when we actually get outside. As we know from the beginning of Irvin's character arc, he is the company man. All of the rules, all of the everything you could possibly know about the cures, he believes in all of it. When it comes to the compliance handbook, when it comes to the 9 core Lumon principles, which he knows all of them, the tempers, all of the history that goes into cure and everything that's happening at Lumon, he knows it all. He is the guy who is completely bought into the entire thing that's happening here at Lumon, at least what we thought. But that is the opposite of who he is in real life. But I believe that it's integral to understand that his 2 different versions of himself are more similar than they are different, because the Irving we experience up until the OTC program is called is an Irving who is obsessed with Lumon, even though it's obsessed positively, because he doesn't actually know why. His intuition is telling him to be obsessed with what the company has going on. But we learn from the outside that this person is just as obsessed with what's happening at Lumon, but for other reasons. But Irv B drinks coffee at night and paints, which is why he is zoning out at work. But it's also the reason while he's zoning out at work, he's seeing all of this paint dripping from the ceilings. I believe that all of this is an effort to try to bypass the chip, to try to tell his any version of himself to go look for this door. How does he know what the testing floor even looks like? Because at the end of the show, without spoiling more that we'll continue to talk about, we understand that this door he keeps painting, this elevator with this red button, is to the testing floor. Why does he know what the testing floor looks like? Well, it's potentially related to the fact that he's been at Lumon for 9 years. What was he doing at Lumon for 6 years before he was severed? That person might know what the testing floor looks like and where it is. We see that in his case, underneath all of his dad's Navy stuff, he has all of these notes on Lumon lawsuits, severed employees list, the Cure Regional Roadmap, where he's mapped out where some of these severed people live. Why is he doing this? Again, I believe he's an agent. He's trying to take down Lumon. He knows more than he even realizes that he knows. And I'm interested to see where the rest of that story goes. Let's talk about Helly R. Helly R is a strong, entitled firecracker who wants her way and can't stand the mundanity of MDR. She does not want to be here. She can't understand why anybody would want to be here, but she simply cannot take it. She is the new refiner that we get at the very beginning of the show that really starts to set the tone for what Severance is. Now, I want to point out that her clothes and her hair tell you exactly what's going on. She wears all the perfect shades of the right blue across her entire wardrobe for a majority of the show, which symbolizes from the very beginning that she's a part of the Eagan clan. Similar to how everyone's wearing blue, especially if they're on the side of still believing in what's happening in Lumon and still being on the side of understanding that they need to be here and that the work is quote unquote important. But there's something different about her, and that blue really goes to foreshadow at the end of the show that she's truly an Eagan. But I want to point out that her distinct, very bright red hair, again, was not something the actress even had until the show started being filmed. So this red hair was an intentional detail they added for this show, and it represents her true nature and her true mind, which is rebellion. It makes me also question why that specific Eagan CEO, the woman, the first woman, wears all red compared to every single other CEO, including the other female CEO. there's more to that story. Now, as the show progresses, you start to see all the shades of red leak into her wardrobe. It starts to get into her shirt, and it starts to spread throughout her clothes, symbolizing how much further and further away she's getting from believing in what's happening here in Lumon. Now, let's talk about how she goes to great lengths to try to quit MDR. But even after almost self-annihilating herself, she is still there. So from the get-go, you're set up to understand why would someone continue to put themselves through being at Lumon even after their innie tried to do something as drastic as this. Well, we later find out that it's because she is Helena Eagan. And the whole reason she got severed was for PR. And unironically, she is supposed to be the poster child for Severance, and that all the pictures, even the pictures Milchick was taking throughout the entire show, were not normal. It was all for this slideshow, for this presentation they were putting together to have PR and to continue to lobby for legalization of severance. Helena Eagan is not good. She is a true Eagan, and she's on the Eagan side. She refers to her innie as not a person, and then lies and says her innie is her sister for the PR of the show. She also knows people are using severance for other things, like the governor's wife for childbirth, for example. She knows all these people. She's friends with all these people at this event. She knows about these things happening that are going on. She kept her innie regardless of her being wanting to, off herself. She also referred to her own innie as someone who's not a person and who she would basically torture in order to get her way. She is a true Eagan. Now, what I do believe is happening in the show, however, is that a lot of these innies are reflections of people's true character and their inner child. And I believe at a young age, potentially when Helena was younger, that Helena was someone who was always against the rules, cutting up, wanting to do different things. At least her inner version of herself wanted to do those things, which is now being perpetuated by her innie in adulthood at Lumon. Now, one of the other most important severed people to talk about is Gemma. Now, Gemma is the wellness director and has been awake for a total of 157 hours, mostly the wellness sessions that she's been doing. She seems and looks and talks and acts like the least experienced innie of all of them, and described as a part-time innie by Selvig. But she ends up on the testing floor, which I believe is the department that never leaves. I believe that is the department that Petey's talking about. It's a department full of people that stay at Lumon no matter what. And we find out that she is Mark's wife. She is the wife that Mark is grieving that he believes has passed away. So it brings up all of these huge questions at the end of season 1 on how is Mark's wife in Lumon? Why is she an innie? Why is she an innie that doesn't leave? Why is she on the testing floor? Like, why does he think she's dead? How did they pull that off? Etc., etc. Now, I believe based on some details we'll talk about later on in this video, that this is setting up for us that Lumon is on path of trying to conquer death, or at least conquer comas, right? Conquering a state of life and conquering different things that are affecting the human ability to continue to live forever. And I believe that people who are in a coma and people that experience different things are what is on the testing floor. I believe that they're testing the limits of what they're able to accomplish. All types of severed employees that we do need to talk about, which will probably be a whole severed video of its own, talking about Bert and the optics and design, and even more severeds than that, because as we know, because of the security office and Irving's list, there are way more severed employees than we even realize. But what I want to curve to right now is who actually is severed. Let's talk about Harmony Cobell. Couple characters that are questionable. You're probably wondering, like I am, are these regular people or are they also severed? Starting with Miss Harmony Cobell, aka Selvig. Now, she's odd, but to me, she's too odd. This is more than just a quirky old lady with some weird beliefs. The things that she does don't make sense, like blow drying the stoop with a hair dryer, and she has a warped version of who her mother is that she does not keep accurate. At one point, she says her mom was an atheist, like in episode 1, where we're talking about good news about hell. And at the other side of it, she says that her mother was a devout Christian. So which one is it? Because we know that when she leaves the Lumon quarters, she's still the same person. She's still this person who knows what's going on at Lumon. She knows everything that's happening, and she's continuing to do it outside of Lumon. I also want to talk about this weird cult-like religious obsession that she has with Eagan, and how she was at this school for girls for Eagan at a young age and clearly considers him to be a figure to her like a god or a father. But is it because he is actually her creator? Now, this could go one of two different ways. Is it because Eagan is actually her real father, which is why she feels so deeply connected to the Eagans and to Lumon itself, is that she feels like she has a place here as someone who might be a daughter that Eagan doesn't know he has, right? Or is it because she is severed and considers him a god because he is her creator, because Eagan would be the creator of all of the severed people? That is something to continue to think about as we talk more about all the implications of religion and what's going on in the undertone of this show. Now let's talk about Mr. Milchick. I believe he potentially could be severed as well. Now, when I'm saying these people are severed, I'm saying that they are operating even in the real world as their severed version, as their innies, but their innies are being outies, aka they're just basically completely in control, and they're completely new people who are operating in the world as Lumon workers. Now, he has also a very strange demeanor, even though it could be from the form of like a children's teacher who knows how to deal with children. He's also very immature in certain ways. Our first perception of him is him playing a child's joke on Mark, telling him to give Miss Cobell a compliment on her office, which was very clearly a lie. So is he severed or is he unsevered? Is he someone who is really severed and any who's operating as an outie? I believe that all of these people, Miss Cobell, Mr. Milchick, and Grainer, could potentially be people who had the procedure and just never turned back into the people that they used to be. Let's talk about Patton. Now, a couple things about him stood out directly to me that start to point out that he also might be a severed innie operating as his outie. Number one, he sympathized too much too quickly with the severance conversation at the no dinner party. Why was he so quick to talk about what severance is and speak over Mark and help him understand and clarify to this person what severance is, and then proceed to call it being trapped, almost as if he's experienced it before? I believe that he is someone who is very clearly used to be a severed person who is operating as his innie, not someone who got unsevered or reintegrated, but is completely currently his innie. He also wants the credit for finding the baby like a child. That to me screams how a child operates all day. He wants the credit, he wants the reward of having been the one to find the child when the child was missing at the end of the season. So again, another reason to believe he's severed. All these people are also impressed by Rickon's writing, something that we know clearly impresses innies, right? So all of these things start to add up to you and start to show you that maybe some of Rickon's friends are all people who got severed and are operating in the world as their innies. I believe Rebecca is similar as well. She makes weird comments about how she changed her name again. She's very odd and very easily influenced. Again, symptoms of being childlike. So who else is also potentially people that are severed operating in the real world as pretending to be their outies, but they're really innies? So now that we've covered who is severed, who's not severed, and who works at Lumon, let's talk about Lumon's adversaries, starting with Mark S.'s sister Devin, and technically Rickon as well, the writer. Now, Rickon and his lifestyle can be described as something that is conscious and holistic and progressive. And I use that holistic word intentionally, which holistic means basically encompassing the thing of a whole. It is not just the part. Holistic medicine looks at the whole person for answers, not a physical symptom, right? Ideas of being conscious of the environment and thinking about all these problems in the world, being progressive in your approach, like soft parenting. That is the type of people that they are, which I believe is supposed to be the antithesis of severance. Being holistic, being whole, being a person who is whole is the antithesis of severance, being a person who is half. So again, think about it that way. So when you start to understand why Rickon and the people are the way that they are, it is quite literally by definition being considered holistic. The next thing to talk about is the Whole Mind Collective, the protesters and the young activists who are against severance itself. Now, the most important part of the WMC is the End Severance poster. If you actually stop to read what the poster says, it says severance robs workers of moral self-governance. One may spend one's day hacking children to bits and go home to one's own and be none the wiser. Now, the reason this is so important is because, number one, it wakes up Mark S to really think about, well, what am I actually doing at work? That is true. Like, I wouldn't know. And the other side of that is that they bring up children again. Children is such a common theme in this show. From what Kier calls all of the severed people his children, babies being born, people being connected to children in some sort of way. It just keeps popping up. And I believe that there's a reason for that. There's a reason they keep telling us to think about the children. Ragabi, who is the doctor who created the implants and implants the chips into all of the severed people, is the person who turned against Lumon and is the person who reintegrated Petey and is the person who is talking to Mark and is the person who murdered Grainer. Now, with Ragabi being someone who is so directly tied to Lumon and turned against Lumon from the inside, the question is, who else? Who else has turned against Lumon that has operated from the inside? And what did they see that made them turn against Lumon? All things that I hope to be explored in season 2. Now, if you made it this far into the video, I was going to start talking about what I believe MDR is doing, what the refiner is, and what they are refining. But that would make this video way too long. So I decided I'm going to save that for a completely separate video that I'm going to put out very soon. So if you want to see that video, like this video, comment down below that you want to see that video and subscribe, hit that subscribe button for future uploads. Now, for the rest of this video, I'm going to talk about the very clear imagery of religion, cults, and the overall basis of where I think the show is going to go. Now, I want to point out one of the first pieces of things of like deep thought quotes we get from the show, which is the good news about hell. And Mrs. Silva talks about the good news and the bad news about hell, and that whatever humans can imagine, they can usually create. Well, this sounds exactly like what we're watching in the show, right? Whatever Kier imagined, he was able to create. There's all this clear imagery of he himself wanting to be considered a god and creating what is his own world, but it could also be considered a hell, right? Hell is just a product of a morbid human imagination. Well, this concept of severance and people who live within a company and never leave, at least in their own minds, because they are only half of a real person, sounds like hell to me. Sounds like a morbid human imagination of what you could do to create cheap workforce labor, right? Another very clear example of how Lumon is being very, very much reflected as a religious cult in a lot of ways is the compliance handbook. It's the most obvious version of this. It quite literally looks like a Bible with the gold on the outside of the pages and the way that it's built, the way that it's written, the way that the text looks inside when you open it. That is a Bible. It's literally a Bible. And it's filled with all these stories and quotes about Kier and the origin of himself and his beliefs and his quotes and his ideas that mimic religious texts, but it's all for Lumon. Now, all of this is intentional. The imagery of Kier and the CEOs everywhere, like as if they're historical figures, and these paintings of them like they're religious prophets and saints, and all this imagery. Even, for example, when Helly finishes her file and hits 100%, and then Kier Egan flies off like he's Superman. All of this is intentional. It's intentionally built as propaganda towards all of the severed. It's so that they become like Irving, where they believe as Kier Egan like he's a god. So they become like Selvig, which only further proves to me, in my opinion, that Selvig is also severed. All of these things are screaming religious cult. Like someone who's trying to create their own cult of followers, of children, of people to live in their own world rule and become gods. Now, again, the 9 core Lumon principles: vision, verve, wit, cheer, humility, benevolence, nimbleness, probity, wiles. Sounds a lot like the 10 Commandments, right? The tempers. These are all things that we see happen time and time again across many different religions. The break room. Now, the break room is in itself a name synonymous for 2 different things. It is a type of the statement that they have to read over and over and over again is a type of punishment as well as a torture mechanism that is something that the military does use to break people. So the break room is not even just like the room to go to take a break. It is the room for you to break them. They're breaking them psychologically through this type of torture and this type of conditioning by repeating the statement over and over and over again as a punishment, breaking someone mentally with the break room. And the very last thing I want to talk about what's happening at Lumon is what is Lumon's goal? Now, the obvious goal that Lumon has is legalized severance. They want to legalize their patented process in order to continue building towards their ultimate motive. And I'll talk about that in a second. They have their hand in many pies, including the police, city hall, lobbying with politicians and senators, opening local businesses, and basically owning entire towns. And they're also running scholarship programs for women in particular pursuits. Expansion, all the empty rooms in the hallway, hence an expansion on the severed floor, maybe even expanding outside of the property. In episode 7, there's an article that Mark is reading, and it says coyote sightings at Gans College cause alarm, indicate greater loss of habitat. Well, why would they be losing habitat? Is somebody building over there on that land? And who? Probably Lumon. Same episode 7, there's another article he's reading that talks about Gans College to announce scholarship winners, several generous donations for female students studying pharmacology and psychology. Donations by Lumon is what I believe. And this pharmacology, well, what is it? It's studying how drugs affect living organisms. And neuropharmacology studies how drugs affect the brain and the influence on neural function behavior and neurological disorders like comas. So again, I think this is all connected. I think that Gemma may have been in a coma from her car crash, and instead of them actually pulling the plug on her like they may have told Mark that they did, they used her coma and they used it to bring her back to life using the severance chip. Now, I believe that that's where all of this is going to go. And it points even more to the rest of what's happening. Product, the data, everything that's going on is humans. We are the product. And I believe, again, this is a reflection of the current day. Data in today's society. Current day data is what social media companies, medical companies, all types of companies sell. And they're selling the data on what it means to be human. They're selling our information, and they're selling what it means to basically own a human being and everything that goes with it, but in a different way, obviously, than the show. But I believe the whole show is a play on this concept where the unidentified data that is being refined within Lumon and within the MDR is actual human beings. Game Egan tells Helena, everyone in the world should get one. Severance and Lumon, obviously, their end goal is probably to take over the world. He talks about how they should all be Kira's children. The Eagans basically want to be gods. This is very clear through how they run their own company, how it's very clearly created to be like a religious cult that deifies them, creates these like deep stories that could or could not be true. This book, the compliance handbook, that is like a Bible that talks about them as people, talks about who they are, and gives them this aspect of like being saints and like being prophets, right? Is that when you go into the back of the perpetuity wing, and you see the Kyrian statue, there's quotes by his statue, and one of them says, "The remembered man does not decay." That is very ironic for a company who created a procedure to forget who you are and create versions of people who are forgotten. All of this starts to point out to you what is really going on in the show. Let's even talk about Kira's favorite breakfast, 3 raw eggs and milk. This is very reflective of someone who cares about health and wellness, and maybe even is predictive of a quest to conquer death at Lumon. We get a really weird quote from Milchick where when Mark S brings up how Petey could have been dead, Milchick says, "Death doesn't happen here. A life at Lumon is protected from such things." Is this the final goal of Lumon itself? through this process of severance, through playing with the data of human beings, biotechnologies, and all of these other things, looking for pharmacology and all these other things that are directly tied to drugs and functions of tech and how they affect the human body and the mind, could the end goal of Lumon itself be to conquer death? Was that the entire goal of Kira himself, of the Eagans as they went down the lineage? Potentially, right? I'm not saying I have it all figured out, but I believe what all of these details point to is that Lumon wants to conquer the world. The Kiras want to be considered gods, and they want to control this world and control their own creation. They want to turn everyone into Kira's children and turn everyone into these half workers who have a work-life balance that work for all of Lumon across the entire planet. They're learning how to create all of these different types of materials and different things that clearly are all within the company, so that everything in the company is Lumon branded, but that's preparing them to literally be able to create everything you could possibly need in a new world, right? I believe that is what's happening here. It's a new world order that is being ushered in through the severance procedure. So let me know what you guys think about this video. Let me know what you guys think about Severance. Let me know what I missed potentially that you guys caught in season 1. I cannot wait to watch season 2, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Season 2, episode 1 breakdown.